Hello and welcome to One on One. I'm Vernon Ramsar. Today we continue our conversation with Sister Arleen Greenidge of St. Dominic's Children's Home. Nice to have you back from having gone nowhere, Sister. Well, as we heard in the first part of this interview, you were talking about how the types of children you have coming into the home has changed over time. How the way the home approaches dealing with the children has changed. It's now more of a home environment as opposed to a dormitory-style environment, for example. But still, St. Dominic's is still in transition, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
First of all, I want to ask you mentioned that at its height, I think you had 300, was it?
Yes,
300
as
kids.
many as, and even in the 60s, 50s, 60s, you would have had as many as 600 children.
600 children?
Yes, at one point in the home's history.
Wow, but now you've only got between 40 and 50, right?
Yes.
Now, what's the cause of that drop? Is that because that's all you're able to handle?
No, because you know, we are moving. Let me start from 2000.
Sure.
In the year 2000, as you must recall, Vernon, that there was a new package of children's legislation.
I do recall.
You do?
Yes.
Okay, good for you. Right.
Been in this business quite a while, so yes, I do remember things.
So over the years, even though many, if not all of these have not been fully proclaimed, like we have the Children's Authority that's partially proclaimed,
right.
Children Act and stuff like that, these pieces of legislation have really been shaping what's happening within the field of residential childcare. We've also, so we've been moving towards, with the introduction of the Children's Authority, we've been moving towards what we now call a regulated approach to residential childcare. Before, what we had was a role called the Inspector of Orphanages. At one point, it was actually the Chief Probation Officer who held that responsibility. But really, in terms of standards and regulations, there wasn't any of that. The notion of children's homes having to be licensed in order to operate, there was none of that. So
anybody could have opened a children's home?
Well, yes, that's, as a matter of fact, Vernon, you can open a children's home.
Okay.
Right? But now we're moving towards a regulated system, which means that you have to be licensed. So when the Children's Authority is fully proclaimed, it means that children's homes will have to be licensed in order to operate. All right?
So I guess you would welcome these changes in legislation.
Definitely. And as well, of course, with that comes the whole thing of best practice informing what we do as childcare providers. So it means that people have to be adequately and appropriately trained, and that care has to be informed by what theory says works. So it isn't just about a hard thing. It isn't just about loving children. It's now about skills and knowledge and loving children, right? So in 2008, our Board of Management embarked upon what we call our organizational transformation process.
Now, we should mention your Board of Management is chosen by the
Archdiocese, right. Because we receive a subvention from the government. We're government assisted. So
your operating expenditure?
Yes, our recurrent expenditure, our staff, our day-to-day expenses, 99% of it is really covered by the government. Where we rely heavily on benefactors and donations would be in projects and new programs, right? And we have quite a few of those. So we rely very heavily on the government as we take care of the nation's children. And we also rely very heavily on corporate and private sponsorship.
For projects. And I guess just to make the kids feel they're in a home as opposed to in an institution.
Right. And aside from their financial support, we also rely very heavily on community for other kinds of skills, other kinds of, as we speak about stewardship, sharing other aspects of their resources. So we have people who volunteer services of different kinds, and I'll speak a little bit more to that in a little bit. But so that's a scenario, okay? So we rely very heavily on the government from that perspective. But oh yes, that's where
yes,
I lost my train of thought for a moment.
Yes.
Right, the Board of Management.
My fault
the
for
Board
leading
of
you down.
Management. No, I just talk so much, Bernard. I talk too much.
No such thing in a talk program.
So the Dominican sisters, which is the congregation I belong to, do the work of running the children's home on behalf of the RC Archbishop. So the board, our board of management, it's a denominational board. So the board of management is named, the members of the board are named by the Archbishop. Okay? So that's sort of its structure. So the Archbishop names the members of the board, and the sisters are responsible for the running of the home. So we take that responsibility. But some of us take that responsibility voluntarily, as the other members of my community would. And some of us do that as members of staff. So I am a member of staff. I'm the home's manager, right? And they largely are staffing our recruitment historically has been done by the statutory authorities. But now more and more we're seeing, alongside that, we're seeing people coming on board via contracts as we recognize the need to fill vital gaps within the organization. Because as we enter into this new dispensation of residential childcare, we've identified huge gaps. Because of course, the needs are different, and therefore what existed cannot fully respond to those needs. So these gaps that we've identified through our transformation process and in conversation with the government, those needs are now to be met via contract by people coming on board.
So even though you may identify gaps in the system that would require specialized training, for example, or specialized staff, it still has to go through the state authority.
Well, remember, we're talking about partnership, and the government does make a significant, and I remember we're speaking about a regulated system. So it is so that whole thing of transparency and accountability is now a vital factor. And therefore, yes, there are clear expectations, there are policies, and there are laws around how we need to operate. And recruitment would be a part of that.
Are you able to get the kind of specialized skills in St. Thomas that you would ideally want?
That's an area that we're now entering into, okay, because it was just last year that the government said to us that you're now able to recruit the people that you need to fill these gaps. Now, a lot of these services, all of these services are really specialized services, and the verdict is still out, but I have my concerns about our ability, given the limited pool in this population of 1.3 million, when you start doing the math in terms of how many people are actually
and those specialized skills are in demand around the world, so we may have our trained citizens moving overseas to work.
Also factor in...
For more money, probably.
Exactly. And also factor in that the changes taking place are not only taking place in St. Dominic's Children's Home.
At all the homes across the country.
All the homes across the board, and all of the agencies that are supporting the work that we do. So Children's Authority is also staffing. The ministry is also staffing. These children's homes are also staffing. Other ministries are staffing. We've been hearing so much about the Ministry of Education. And so really we're going to be, I don't know if competing might be the word, but we're going to be reaching for, many of us are going to be reaching for the similar kinds of skill sets. And there is some concern around that. So I suppose the next few years the government will have to encourage, to motivate, to give incentives, because I suspect that we're going to find ourselves in need of certain skills and certain skill sets that we just not going to be able to access in the short term.
That sounds like a good plan to sort of approach UTT for, wouldn't it? Specialized training in that area.
Yes.
Which I guess was the point of having UTT.
We have been in conversation. For example, with Credi, we have been having some conversations around training for staff and that kind of thing. But of course, there's a broader picture that would need to be addressed here, because we're talking about highly specialized services. We're talking about social workers, we're talking about developmental psychiatrists, child psychiatrists, we're talking about all kinds of resources that I think are in short supply. So it will call for a lot of planning, but the journey begins with a single step. So I think we're certainly moving in the right direction, and well, hopefully by the grace of God, it will unfold in our favor.
And by you saying that, it brings up an interesting point as well, by the grace of God. The fact that one of the things that distinguishes St. Dominic's is the fact that there are various children's homes across the country, but you are a Catholic-run institution, which, whatever people may feel about the Catholic Church, the fact is that it means that you have people, in this case Dominican sisters, who have dedicated their life to a cause, in this case, of helping these kids. The kids' lives are your lives, because you're there 24/7.
It shapes our lives.
That, of course, makes for an interesting and probably, I would imagine, better experience for the kids, knowing that they have sort of parents around at all times. But we're also working in a world where people who sort of go into the vocation it's becoming smaller and smaller in number, isn't
you
it?
have fewer and
And that's
fewer.
something that's going to be a challenge for the home as we
Yes.
move forward in the future.
Yeah.
I know even my former school, Presentation College, doesn't have a single brother there anymore.
That's
for
why we
example.
speak about this whole approach of teamwork and partnering and that kind of thing and getting buy-in. And I suppose that's always been the way that the church has worked as well, because even though you, for example, education, the church has also made a huge contribution in education. But at some point, you step aside, and because people are empowered, people have subscribed to the vision and the values and that kind of thing, you find that lay people are able to enter into the roles and responsibilities and be able to deliver.
So you develop a template, and then people can work with that
That
afterwards.
is what we are certainly moving
But it
towards.
takes out-
But there'll always be a contribution that we have
But I
to
was
make.
thinking, but it takes out that sort of emotional part that the nuns would add to it, wouldn't it?
Because it always entails some loss, eh? You know, there is always, and I think, you know, that is one of the things that I have noticed, observed, that even as we share, and not just with sisters, but people who have been familiar with the Belmont orphanage and that kind of thing, you see people say, gosh, it's only 45, it's only 50 children all they have, because they remember those days of the 300 and of the 600. You know, so it is how can we help people to understand that best practice, understanding the needs, change of the population. But for the outsider looking in, they may be not adequately informed outsider, that kind of regret even, you know, who should call it the home change, eh? Who is only, this is only 3 sisters, only 6 sisters. But so there is always, you always lose something. You think about opportunity costs. As we move ahead, as we embrace the future, there are going to be things that we need to leave behind. And some of the things we have to leave behind are things that were cherished, that were beautiful, that worked, but that was that time. That was those children with those particular needs, with that kind of awareness, right? And we are moving into a different time, and I prefer not to lament, celebrate the wonderful things that were, but ask ourselves, what is God asking of us, and what do these children need as we enter into this new dispensation? And that to me is exciting. I suppose maybe I'm really an adventurer at heart. I find it exciting. The pain is there, yes, and there is always loss. Every opportunity has a cost, and you don't look back with regret. You look back with gratitude, and we embrace the future. What can we learn from the past as we move into the future? And that whole thing of the steppers model, like the steppers model that we've developed, I think has done that. We've tried to develop what has worked. We've seen what best practice tells us will work given the present day needs, and we've tried to shape those with a certain measure of fidelity, not a certain measure, with fidelity to our values as Dominican sisters, as people who embrace our culture, as people who celebrate what's good in our time. So we think the Steppers model represents that. And so this is what, if I may share, in the consultation we have coming up in March 27th, this is what we want to share with our stakeholders, because we recognize we need our stakeholders, not just for the money that they have to share with us, we need that as well.
Always welcome.
But we need your support, we need and other kinds of resources. We need people to teach our children how to read, we need homework support, we need, so we need people. We have so many beautiful stories about people, about organizations, corporate citizens, families, who have done such wonderful things with us and for our children. And we don't want to lose that. And so we think it's important that we help people to understand this is where we're heading, because this is what our children, these are the needs of our children. Make that journey with us. So the consultation is one way of inviting people to come and hear, come and get a deeper understanding about where we're at as we're entering into this time of regulated residential childcare. What does that demand of us? We need you to understand, because we want your support to continue. We need your love to continue. And you can only do that if you really understand where we're going to.
Where is the consultation taking place?
It's at St. Dominic's Children's Home,
in Belmont,
and the hall there. It's on the 27th of March. And we're inviting people to
At what time?
call. It starts at 10 a.m.
Okay.
And it's just for 2.5 to 3 hours. And we're asking people to call ahead and express their interest, so that we'll be able to know how much we actually have to cater for. So to call us at the home, 624-7882, 625-7081, or 797-0106, and express your interest in participating in our Steppers consultation, so that you can understand, where we're at this point in our history, where we're going to, and how we would like you to partner with us in getting our children there.
And it might give people a more complex understanding of what actually goes on at the home, because to many people it's a Christmas time thing. You collect toys, give them to the poor kids at St. Dominic's, and that's really not what it's about, because you're dealing with the other 364 days of the year, which is about raising young citizens to be better people. Speaking of which, I mean, you don't always have control over which kids enter the home, and it seems to be, it must be a rather chaotic environment where you have people being, I guess, perhaps being sent by court order, for example, who may have behavioral issues, being put in with kids who just have to leave their home because their parents couldn't handle it.
And how I long and I look forward to those peaceful days, Vernon. And then there are days when there is so much of chaos and confusion, largely because we receive children sometimes who just do not fit into the organization, or not into the organization, into the
community.
Or let me put it this way. As a matter of fact, let's flip that. Children coming into our care and our services do not fit their needs. More sadly, Vernon, more and more we're seeing children and young people presenting with some very severe behavioral issues and sometimes some mental health issues. It's not a St. Dominic's Children's Home thing, right? I don't want to contribute to the stigma. Throughout our society, we're seeing more and more young people presenting with depression. We're seeing more and more children and young people presenting with all kinds of behavioral challenges, conduct disorders. Sometimes our parents are unable to set limits, to set boundaries, to supervise adequately, and maybe not because of ill will, but because they themselves don't have the skills or they don't have the support. And so the children who grow up in these environments, and I dare say grow up because many of them come to us at 8, 9, 10, 12, and so they've really, those formative years were in that kind of disorganized environment. They come into care, and for many of them, we are able to provide for their needs in fits and starts, because we ourselves, this new model is unfolding. But basically, and
the institution is also adjusting itself to the new and
that takes time.
Coming in.
Okay, so we can. But there are some children who come into care, into our care, who are sent into our care, simply because the services that they need do not exist. And when that happens, everybody loses. Everybody loses.
That child's
needs cannot be met, and so they hit out. We're unable to manage their behavior. The children who are in our care, their needs can't be met, because caregivers now have to focus on a lot of parting fights and other kinds of difficult and challenging situations. So they can't give the same energy that they should be able to give to the care and protection of the other children. And of course, the staff who are ill-equipped, their needs, let's put it that way, also aren't met, because all of us really want to give and to make a difference. So we have these scenarios that play themselves out, and it is largely because the services and the needs, the services which these children need, children who as the level of care need, those services do not exist.
So ideally, should there be another institution that can handle?
So I anticipate that one of the huge challenges the Children's Authority will face, and the ministry, will be in providing incentives or opportunities, or they themselves taking up the slack in providing residential care or foster care or whatever is a particular intervention, out of home intervention, that this particular child, this particular population would require. It doesn't exist at the moment, and that has to be put in place, because if it doesn't, you will continue to see these children being placed in situations where their needs, their protection needs, their safety needs, their care needs, their mental health needs, their supervisory needs cannot be met. And everybody loses in that instance.
And the level of frustration, as you mentioned, throughout your home becomes higher and higher and higher.
That's it.
So, but do you think, is there any kind of move towards
Well,
creating
I know with the Children's Authority I know that they've identified at least the first location for the assessment center, but I know that the Children's Authority is working towards it. The ministry as well, from what we've been told, the ministry itself, is looking to put a whole lot of things in place, and I just hope and pray that it can be done in a timely enough fashion to make a difference to us in the short to medium term, because long term, it means you're going to lose a whole generation of children, if the needs, because we're talking about a significant number of children here. We're talking about a significant number of children here whose needs
because of the nature of society, we're generating more
because of the
kids who are
breakdown that
troubled.
we're seeing in our society and what children are exposed to. As I said, hurt people, and sometimes the level of care they need in helping to treat with that hurt, that level is not catered for. So that is one of our concerns as we see this as I speak about entering this new dispensation. That's one of our concerns.
In terms of I'm going to say the average kid in St. Dominic's, but I mean there's no such thing as an average kid. But let's just say for the purpose of this discussion, the average kid there, what is the scenario? The kid comes into St. Dominic's, and do they just stay there indefinitely?
Well, let me
until
tell
they
you
reach
what
age?
should happen.
And what does happen?
Which we're moving to and what is presently happening. So as I say, we're moving towards a regulated approach to residential childcare. So the legislation, let's look at that. The legislation speaks about the Children's Authority Act, speaks about something called they refer to an individual treatment plan. So that is recognizing one of the things that we look at in the Steppers model, that care has to be individualized. Because the two of us can be faced with the same scenario in terms of our history, and yet respond differently. It has to do with all kinds of things, our personality, it has to do all kinds of things. Okay? So care has to be personalized, individualized. So it means that the first thing that needs to happen is that the child has to be assessed. The Children's Authority, and I don't beg to speak on behalf of the Children's Authority, I certainly don't have that role or responsibility. But as we understand it, the Children's Authority is taking responsibility for the assessment of our children, the nation's children. So it is the Children's Authority in this regulated system, as far as I understand it, they are the ones who will be assessing and therefore identifying what placement would work best for this child. So if that plays itself out, it should mean that the children coming to us should be able to better benefit from what we offer, because it means that fit would have been something that the Children's Authority would have considered.
And
right?
ultimately, the ultimate aim would be what? Adoption or being placed in foster home?
All of that. So the treatment plan, once a child comes to the home, gives way to what we now call an individualized care plan. And that is when one of the things you have to look at in your care plan is your placement option. Because another part of the Steppers model is that it is outcomes oriented. It's evidence based, that's one of the E's, and it's outcomes oriented. So it's not about keeping children in care, it's about a goal. It's about an outcome. So when you do the assessment, and the assessment is not only of the child, it's about the client system, it's about the system. So you're also assessing the family of origin, identifying strengths, identifying, those kinds of things. So it's a comprehensive assessment. And based on that assessment, you develop your plan, and the plan has an outcome. So for us at St. Dominic's Children's Home in our ICP, we have, of course, the number one outcome that you really seek is, because you're looking for permanency, is that child's reintegration into the family of origin, where it is in his or her best interest. Right. That's the first outcome you're looking at. If that is not possible, if your assessment suggests that that is not possible, you look for the next most permanent, which might be adoption. Okay. Then if that is not possible, well, the next possible thing you might look at might be foster care, right? Because the assessment may say to you, this child needs a more individualized setting, or they need a certain kind of a setting, and so you would look for a foster care setting that would meet that need. But there are some children who would always need residential childcare. The group home setting would be the best thing for that. So the first thing is what you're moving towards. Then what are the behaviors or what are the issues that you have to address in order to get that child there? Okay, some of those issues might be social work type issues where you have to make some interventions in terms of the family system to better equip the family to receive their child if that is the outcome you're working towards, reintegration. Then you'd have some interventions aimed and goals aimed towards the child. There might be some concrete behaviors. So for example, we're talking about trauma loss. So there might be some particular trauma that needs to be resolved. So you may have to have some trauma intervention, or you may have to have some kind of other kind of therapeutic intervention. Also, there are all kinds of, so the point is that coming into child care, it is now outcomes oriented, and you're working towards a specific goal.
So the home is not the end of the line. We're out of time,
Right.
Sister Arleen, which is always happening with us. I know again. But we have to remind people, the 27th of March at 10 a.m.
10 a.m. to Dominic Children's Homes to give us a call.
A consultation,
So that
yeah.
we know that to accommodate that we need that you're going to be attending.
Well, listen, it's always a pleasure having you in the program. It's wonderful having anybody in the program who makes a difference in the world in a positive way. I know you have to run up and see one of my other
Thanks for
favorite
that.
people at Living Waters right now. So, Sister Arleen Greenidge, a pleasure having you in the program.
Thank you. God
Thank you
bless you
so
with
much for being here.
blessings.
Thank you. You've been watching One on One. Join us again tomorrow for another edition.